Just a quick one. I was in a discussion with a believer, and we were talking about the issue of salvation. And that believer raised up a particular point which I want to address in this video. And what was the point? The point was that Adam did not know, the first Adam did not know what disobedience was. That was why he fell. That God would have taught Adam, the first Adam, what disobedience is. And that would have made him to make the decision of not to eat the tree. So kind of putting a blame on God that the first Adam was not well informed. And that was what led to the fall. I want to say that that is very incorrect and it's theologically wrong. What we have today, like Dr. Miles Monroe said, that many of our churches today are teaching religion. And the story of salvation is not about religion. It's about the kingdom of God. It's not about religion. Many of our churches are teaching religion, trying to bring Christianity as a form of religion that is superior to other religions. That is not what the Bible is all about. And that is not what the gospel of Christ is all about. The gospel of Christ is all about the kingdom of God. And like I explained to that believer, if you don't understand this, you will get many things wrong. First of all, why was man created? I have read books where certain religions ascribe the first Adam to be maybe their prophet or part of their religion. That is not also correct. The story of creation was about God extending his rule to the earth. God extending his rulership to the earth. Which means that the earth is or supposed to be the extension of God's kingdom. That is the story. So when God gave Adam dominion, what did God give Adam? He gave him authority. Authority, which is a legitimacy to bring the extension of God's kingdom to the earth. Giving him the power to execute what God has ordained to be executed on the earth. So Adam becomes a representative of God, a king on the earth, with the King of Kings as his Lord. And in a kingdom is not a democracy. A kingdom is autocratic in nature. When a king gives a decree, you don't sit down in a legislative quarters or in a legislative setting to analyze what the king has said, so that the king would come to, explain himself why he made that decree, so that implementation can be carried out. We have seen, like I'm a Nigerian, we have seen the Senate inviting the president to come and make presentations. That is not how the kingdom of God works. The king gives a command, and the subjects in the kingdom must comply. They don't need to know why that decree was made. They don't need to know why that command was made. All they need to know that the command and the decree was made, and that becomes a boundary of obedience. In the same way, God commanded Adam, don't eat of that tree. In the book of Genesis, don't touch that tree. That was a command. So it was not for Adam to know why the command was given. Because in a kingdom, you don't question the king. In a kingdom, you don't call the king to account. You don't. You obey. And in a kingdom, the princes, the authority that has been given to them is subject to the king. Which means that the authority of the prince cannot override, overrule the authority of the king. Because the authority of the prince is derived from the king. But the king's authority, he derives it from himself. So when God gave that command, don't eat of the tree, don't touch of it, that was a command. For in the day you eat it, in the day you eat it, in the day you touch it, you shall die. So it was not for Adam to now come and say, God, because you did not explain what that death means, I wouldn't have done it. That is wrong. God, if I have known that death means separation from you, I wouldn't have done it. That is not correct. And the brother said that God would have taught him what disobedience is. And I said to him, that is also not correct. Because the first Adam was created in a state of innocence. The first Adam was not created to choose between good and bad. Because good and bad were not in his diction. They were not in his diction. He was not created to choose between good and bad. It was not in his diction. He was created in the state of innocence, where he's solely reliant on what the king presents and provides. So if God had brought Adam, sat him down in the garden, said, okay, every 6 p.m. we are going to be having classes. I want to teach you what disobedience is. What would have happened? God himself would have corrupted the nature of the first Adam. He was not meant to know the other side of obedience. He was not created to know that. The first Adam was not created to know that. He was created to live on the instructions of God. He was created to live on everything that God provided for him. Every instruction that was given to him, he was created to live on that. He was not created to know disobedience. He was not created for God to teach him what disobedience is, because that would have been a corruption of his nature. What did Apostle Paul tell us? In the book of Galatians 2. He said that before the law, I was alive. Before the law, I was alive. But when the law came, I died. Why? He said, I wouldn't have known what covetousness is if it were not for the law. The law told me what covetousness is. And because I knew what covetousness is, I started having desires of covetousness. Because the law is not made for the righteous. The law is made for lawbreakers. The law was given because of sin, not because of righteousness. Though the law is righteous, which represents the standard and the nature of God, but it was given to create that boundary. It was given because of sin. So the law was revealing sin to the people. The law was bringing about the knowledge of sin, not the knowledge of righteousness, the knowledge of sin. The law was pointing the sin to the people. pointing their sins to them. And the people became sin conscious. And sin multiplied. So if God had sat the first Adam down, teaching him about disobedience, then God would have been teaching the first Adam about sin. And if God was teaching the first Adam about sin, Adam would have had the knowledge of sin. Then God would have been put to blame for corrupting that nature of the first Adam. So I wanted to correct that, because there are many believers today who are peddling this, that because Adam did not have knowledge of what disobedience was, he wouldn't have disobeyed. That's not correct. The first Adam was created in a state of innocence to follow God. Everything that God presents to him, that was what he was to live by. Nothing more, nothing less. So Adam made his choice, because God gave man that dominion, gave man that authority to express himself, gave him that free will to express himself based on what was provided by God. But the day he made that mistake of disobeying the command of God, what happened? Sin came into the world. Which means the nature of sin came into the world. Adam was no longer fashioned in the image of God. The image of sin became his nature. And because the image of sin became his nature, everyone who came from the root of Adam before Christ also had that nature of sin. Because what did God do with Adam? Adam was created in the image of God and the likeness of God, so that through that image of God in Adam, he will replicate it to the earth. But when he fell, he had the image of sin. So when men were being born, they were no longer born after the image of God. They were being born after the image of Adam, because Adam means mankind. Adam is the model of the old man. So I just wanted to correct that this morning. So for anyone saying that Adam did not know much about disobedience, that was why he disobeyed, that is theologically wrong. It has no context in scriptures. God points us to himself. God points us to righteousness, not to sin. And that is why Jesus Christ came today, so that through him you are being pointed back to God. You are being pointed back to the love of God. You are being pointed back to the righteousness of God, not to sin. The coming of Jesus Christ is not the coming to form a new religion. The coming of Jesus Christ is not the coming to point men to their sin. The coming of Jesus Christ is for men to be pointed back to God, to the righteousness of God, to the love of God, not to sin. The law pointed men to sin, but Christ is coming to point us to God. So when you understand the gospel of Jesus Christ, it is pointing you to God. It's pointing you to righteousness. It's pointing you to holiness. It's pointing you to the love of the Father, not to sin. God did not send Christ to reveal to us what sin is, to give us an exponential knowledge base of sin. No. The coming of Christ is to give us a robust knowledge of God, of who God is, who is right, what is righteousness all about, and how we are to align in that way. That is the difference between the coming of Christ with the law. The law pointed the people to sin. Why sin also ruled in their flesh. But Christ came to point you to God, to point you, to take your eyes away from sin, because he has defeated sin on the cross. Sin is inconsequential. He has defeated the nature of sin on the cross. He came not to reveal sin to you anymore, but to point you to Christ, to point you to Christ, to point you to God, to point you to the righteousness and the love of God. So The coming of Christ does not give us the revelation of sin consciousness. It gives us the revelation of God's consciousness. When we start knowing that, we would understand what the story of salvation is all about. And on a final note, the brother made another statement. He said that God needed the first Adam to fall so that he will fulfill his purpose. There is nothing like that. Salvation is merely a corrective action. God did not need Adam to fall. There was nothing like a grand plan. There was nothing like a grand plan. The only grand plan of God was that God will extend his rule to the earth. God will extend his kingdom to the earth. Men will become kings under the dominion of God, under the authority of God, under the rulership of God, to bring to pass what the desires, the will of the king on the earth. That was the grand plan. But when God saw ahead of time, because of his foreknowledge, that his plan will be thwarted, he made a provision for it before it occurred. So salvation is not about man falling. Salvation is about a corrective action by God to ensure that his original intent for his rulership on the earth continues. So God did not need Adam to fall. And God has given man a free will of choice. God does not interfere with that free will of choice. He presents to you the truth. It's left for you to decide if to follow the truth, if to become a slave of sin or a slave of righteousness. But God will not interfere with your free will. All right? So I just wanted to bring some context to that. So God did not need Adam to fall for his grand plan. There was nothing like that. Jesus Christ, salvation that we have today, was just a corrective action by God to ensure that the dominion that man lost through sin is reclaimed back. So what we have today as Christianity is not a religion. But unfortunately, people teach it as a religion. It is the kingdom of God. For you to understand the gospel of Christ, for you to understand the Bible, you must look at it from the point of the kingdom, not a point of religion, of do's and don'ts, by the point of the kingdom. And when you get that knowledge, you will live your life freely in accordance to the will of God. God bless you and have a wonderful day.